Hello. Can we move to your background sound? Okay, so this is just so that you know what's gonna come. Okay, I think it's better than to use this as a microphone.
This?
Yeah, we'll just leave it here. It'll capture the voice.
It will?
It'll not take in too much background sound. Yeah. All right.
Don't hit play yet.
It's all good. Camera's off. Mic is off. I think. Let's do this.
Okay, so how are we sitting?
We're live now, so I've just muted it.
Okay.
We'll sit this way, and I'll start with asking questions. Okay, all right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Wunder Insights. We're really proud to have Melika Jahangiri with us to talk about her experiences working in the new mobility space with the likes of Ford and Rightcell. New mobility is a much debated, it's a fairly new field, and profitability is very debated, whether models work or not. And everyone wants that one silver bullet. So the question is there one? Have you had experiences at previous companies or working with partners building such a thing? We're here to hear from you. So with that, I'll hand it over to you. If you could start with an introduction, that would be great, Melika.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm really excited to be here and to interact with you guys. So please send over your questions, etc. My background is that I am the vice president
How about now? I think it should work now. So maybe let's circle back. We'll do a quick intro again.
So you saw my acting skills.
It's a silent webinar.
There was a silent webinar. Okay, so sorry about that. The first couple of minutes, you just got to see me talking a lot with my hands, which I do quite a bit. So I guess we'll take it all the way to the back, and I'm going to do a quick intro on myself. I joined Wunder about 6 weeks ago, and I was previously at RideCell, which is another third-party software provider. Also, I was at Ford Motor Company, where I was overseeing lines of business like Chariot and non-emergency medical transport and GoRide for our international services in other markets. And prior to that, I've worked at a closed car share platform called Envoy, and then another one called Borrow. So I have a lot of experience in this space, very passionate about it and interested in it, not only from an operator experience, but also as a user, because I am actually a non-car owner in Los Angeles, which when I tell people, they freak out and are very surprised that somebody can live in Los Angeles and get around every single day using mobility services. I use the metro, scooters, bikes, Uber, etc. And so I have a unique perspective because I understand, like many of you, what it's like to be an operator, and also understand, kind of what your customers are doing and what, drives me and intrigues me about using different types of mobility service. So I like to bring my unique perspective whenever I'm having a client meeting or a prospect or anyone I meet at conferences, and kind of share, what my experiences have been both as a user and also as an operator, and see how we can help and co-collaborate together.
So we're here to talk about profitability in this new mobility space, and you have joined us fairly recently. Can you quickly talk about why Wunder was interesting as a company for you to join?
Yeah. So when I was at Ford Motor Company, I actually became familiar with Wunder because we considered using them more than once in multiple markets that we were going into internationally, with different products and things that we were looking to do and test and pilot. And I was always interested in the team. I thought that their product was really excellent. And so when Sam came to me about this role, I had always wondered about Wunder. And so it was a good opportunity for me to come and share my experience. And, the thing that I like to bring to Wunder that's a little bit different is that I actually have operator experience and I have mobility experience. And, my goal is to not just be someone that is going out and selling a software service to anyone. It's really someone to come in and say, okay, what does this look like for this market? What does it look like for that market? How do we help you launch and scale this? Because the way you're going to look at Los Angeles or Seattle is going to be totally different than what you look at when you're in Zurich or Paris. And we have to be really mindful of that. And execution is very key to trying to get to profitability. So all that stuff from figuring out permits ahead of time, picking out the right scooters, the hardware, the right software, all of that plays into unit economics and your fixed costs and how you're going to eventually hit a path of profitability.
So it sounds like you're already building out a checklist of things that anyone new to this or testing the waters should think about. Is there such a checklist in your mind from your experience working at Ford and setting up projects in different places?
Yeah, so I would say there's always going to be some sort of playbook, right? When you are a mobility operator and you're going to think about what is my product and what is my niche and how am I going to attract customers and utilization, etc. But that playbook has to change depending on where you're going. And, the market will dictate that. And I think one thing that I've learned that was really essential for me was when I was at Ford, we had a very structured playbook for how we were going to launch Chariot. So regardless if we were doing it in San Francisco, or if we were doing it in New York or Seattle, we always had the same checklist, if you will.
For the sake of those that don't know, could you quickly recap what Chariot was about?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm forgetting that we have a lot of international people on the line, but if you're in the States, you were familiar. But Chariot was a micro transit carpooling shuttle service in the States that would take people to and from work or their homes during commuter hours. So kind of worked in the similar capacity of a bus, but it was fixed route. So unlike a Moya, for example, that is dynamic, or like an Uber pool that's dynamic and can pick you up from your house, this would be kind of like certain locations, and we would pinpoint you to the closest one to where you were, and you would have to walk a distance, and it would take you to and from work every single day. We would do B2C service, which was a public service at $4 a ride, and then we'd also do a B2B service where, you know, like companies like Google and Rakuten, etc., would utilize our service, and they would pay per vehicle per month and create like customized routes for their employees to take, and it would be a benefit for them. So back to my story of things that I've learned from Chariot, we would have like a playbook in place where, you know, if we were launching a new market, again, if it was Seattle or Ohio or San Francisco, we would always kind of execute at the same level. And that would be with 40 Ford Transits on the site. And then we'd hire 20 drivers and then about like 5 to 7 operations people from day one. And one example that comes to mind that was, you know, always sticks with me is our process for Seattle. And so the city of Seattle, you know, we had originally come in, there's a strong desire for mobility, there's a strong use case, you know, like everything about that market makes you say like, I absolutely need to be in there if I'm a mobility operator. But the city of Seattle also feels sometimes that services can be competitive to theirs and might, take away from transit riders or bus riders. And so we have to be really careful about kind of how we proceed with cities. And that was like very keen with our launch in Seattle, because they actually felt that Chariot service was a competitor to theirs, and they didn't understand that it was like complementary. And so for 9 months, we were in that market without an actual permit to operate, with 40 vehicles, 20 drivers, X amount of operations people, accumulating a huge fixed costs, going down, the path for months and months on end with not one day of service. And so we realized very quickly in that situation that we can't launch every market in that same capacity, and we have to be a lot more mindful. And also what kind of work can we be doing beforehand?
Mm-hmm.
With an expansions team that kind of will parachute in, and you see that now a lot with Bird and Lime and others. They have an expansions team with all they do is just fly around, and they're parachuting in, talking to the cities, getting the buy-in, figuring out where their warehouse is, figuring out where they're going to launch in geofence, and kind of how many scooters they need, XYZ. And then once they kind of have all of their operations in place, then they start to, with the original expansion team, launch for the first few months. And then they start to hire a GM, ops people, etc., that are localized to the market that can help them launch and scale it, further than that. And so those are the things that we kind of learned later.
Mm-hmm.
And those are hard lessons to learn, but I think they're also really important lessons to learn. And then we use that kind of experience to look at mobility in a different capacity when we were thinking about our non-emergency medical transport business. So for those who don't know what NEMT is, which is the non-emergency medical transport, it is essentially a service that is Ford Transit vehicles that have been upfitted, where the vehicles have the ability to put 2 wheelchairs in the back, and then the drivers are trained to be able to go pick up the patients from their beds, put them in the vehicles, take them from their vehicles, and take them straight to their doctor's appointments, their regular doctor's appointments. And so if somebody has diabetes and they need consistent dialysis, they need to go at least twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's very hard to do for many people, and it can be very expensive. And if you take an Uber and a Lyft, they don't have that human touch. And so they created
tailored niche.
Exactly. And working strictly with hospitals and insurances, and also with senior living homes, because anytime somebody who has a chronic condition is missing an appointment, it actually costs a lot of money for insurance companies and hospitals. It's 10 or 15 times what it would cost if they were to just keep going to the regular appointment. So it's worth it for them to pay for this additional service.
Mm-hmm.
And, with that particular service, it was incubated within like the backyard of Dearborn, Michigan, and Bellevue. And they worked with one particular senior living home, and they like piloted it, and then they tested with like 10 to 15 vehicles. And they started to learn the operations and the scale and like the customer expectation and like the wait time and all that kind of stuff that plays into the service. And as a result, it became the first profitable business, new business to come out of Ford Motor Company, and like will continue to grow and scale in that same capacity, you know, in the years to come. And so I think that sometimes you have these experiences like the Chariot one, where you do some really interesting learnings, and sometimes you do some hard learnings and fails, but then you kind of need to implement it going down the road and seeing how you can kind of do things better. And that leads me to another subject that I think is really important, and something that we're hearing a lot of when it comes to profitability, is piloting. And so the approach now with these larger OEMs is they're not going to come out necessarily and say, I'm going to start a new car sharing service with 1,000 vehicles in a market and, you know, see how it works out and create my own app. Like that structure is just not working anymore. Because if you look at Maven, they spent $50 million on their app, and they were only around for 2 years in 8 markets. And now, you know, they're going to be shuttering down for the most part. If you look at Car2Go, similar experience. Reach Now in Seattle and Portland, similar experience. And so we've just kind of noticed that now companies want to start smaller and kind of do that incubation where they're kind of taking 50 vehicles or, you know, 100 vehicles in a more closed, confined space that they could manage that's closer to their backyard, learning the use case, learning, you know, what they can do with it, using, you know, getting the utilization, the customer experience, all that stuff down, and then using that to do a lot, you know, full scale business.
So this sounds like it's really reflecting your experiences as well with Chariot, where you have to understand where you're doing this business. What is the regulation there? So just sort of to summarize, what is the regulation there? Are you co-opting or going against sort of the system that you're working within, whether you've made the right connections? So to think that through if you're thinking about expanding past a pilot, and also within your operations to start small and ring fence it, have a very clear idea of what problem you're solving for whom. So
Exactly.
to understand the customer journey, and then and only then think about expansion and these parachuting expansion teams, as you call them. Is that a fair summary? Yeah.
And like a great example of that in real time is what Ford did before they acquired Spin, which is they created a scooter service, a fake scooter service, and they kind of didn't tell anybody that it was a Ford service, and you know they didn't really announce it, and they put about 100 scooters on Purdue University's campus. They gave it the name of Jelly, and they used a third-party software. They tested it for about 6 weeks. They wanted to get, you know, what is the unit economics of the scooters? What are the wear and tear? What is the customer experience? What is the utilization? How do you launch and scale this? How do you work with like a third-party provider, or how do you even work with like campuses and real estate? Is that like the line of business that we should be thinking about, like commercialization of what we're doing, XYZ? And so they did that for 6 weeks. It was successful. Then they took it internally and showed their findings and said, okay, we've done all these learnings and we think this is a really interesting piece of business that we should actually be a player in. And either we're going to create our own service or we're going to use this as a basis to acquire. And they use that as the basis to acquire Spin. And I feel that from the conversations I'm having more and more, that's the kind of strategy that you know, the larger OEMs or like even startups that are successful are thinking of launching a new line of service are going to be thinking about and doing moving forward. Because one, you want to make sure that this is actually a piece of business you want to continue to do long term. And so it doesn't make sense for you to build your own app sometimes. And like, you know, we don't think it's a build versus buy discussion or argument, but maybe sometimes a hybrid. And I think that that's kind of going to be more of the sentiment moving forward. But I think what's happening now is somebody wants to try something and they want to try it for 2 to 3 years first, really understand the business, really understand whether or not this is something that they want to do long term. And then after they've kind of built out a use case that makes sense for them, decide whether or not that they're going to build or buy. And, we can help them with that discussion, because if they want to build their own, we have like ways in which we can collaborate with them, like with our Wunder tools. We can help them customize and get things kind of moving faster for them. So a great example of that is, if somebody is like, I want to build something, but I need XYZ components of it, we can just kind of come in and plug in. Or it could be somebody who's an existing car share operator with, like, let's say 10,000 vehicles, who has their own app today and says, I need to create a damage reporting, and it's going to take me 9 months and X amount of money to do it myself, or I can come to you and pay you and just plug and play it and like move on.
So it could be modular in a sense.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be that's the trend that we're seeing, because mobility moves so quickly. It moves so fast. Like, the product can change within 6 months to 6 weeks to 6 days. And so if you're still trying to like compete with the market by building something that probably, for the most part, the ones that have been created by the Mavens of the world and stuff like that just haven't had a very good user experience, and that's why people didn't actually utilize it, because they had so many problems opening the app and closing the app, etc. So then the utilization went down. Like, you don't really have a lot of chances to impress the customer and make sure that they have a good enough experience when they come back and continue to use your service. So like, we always say, like, leave that to us to help you figure that out, and go actually do what's really important, which is figuring out the operations and figuring out the scale and how you're going to make this, a business that's viable for you long term.
Sure. It sounds like you're very clearly advocating for partnering or collaborating, and you see a role for that in this space. But before we touch on that, I want to make sure that we're giving kind of we're playing the devil's advocate here as well. So why do OEMs or large corporates continue to think about building a in-house? If you take their side, why is it that what are the reasons they're giving for doing such a thing?
Yeah, so I think that it always comes down to control, and people want to control the experience or the app or the funding, or I have this amazing engineering team, like, why wouldn't I utilize them? But sometimes that control, because you're so attached to it, can end up hurting you. And so what we do that's a bit different than, I would say, anyone else in the space, like any other third-party software provider, is that we're making a core platform that is going to be great for all, and like, it's going to withstand itself. Like, we haven't had any crashes or anything like that, because we are always thinking about, like, what does this platform need for anybody who wants to do car sharing or micromobility or carpooling, and making it as good for the masses versus like saying, okay, we have this large OEM who wants to come and use our service, but they want 10, 20 features that we don't have, that we need to just build in there, that might be beneficial to one person, but isn't beneficial to the whole, and then ends up hurting the platform, and then causes bugs and crashes and, poor utilization, etc. for our customers. And so we've done a totally different approach, where we kind of are thinking about it in that capacity of what's in the best interest of the product and what's in the best interest of everyone who's using that product. And so we try to be very collaborative also with our existing customers, and also when we're having conversations with our prospects of like, what is it that you think that you want or need, or like, what are some of your nice to haves and what are your must haves? And I would say that we always hit that must have category fairly easily, and then a lot of their nice to haves are also in our app to begin with. But it's always good to hear from the source what it is that they think that their product is going to need long term as they grow and scale, because it's our goal to grow and scale with them. And so we are always kind of thinking about that in a very collaborative way, and doing learnings together on the stuff that we're building out as well.
Okay, so since that word has come up a couple of times, let's take a step back and talk about collaboration.
Yeah.
So what in your mind is the role of collaboration in the industry in general? So how have you seen it evolve from these sort of vertically integrated end-to-end models to what is now a highly disintermediated market?
Yeah. So, I mean, look at what's going on in the market. I mean, things are happening so fast that you would have never in your wildest dreams imagined Daimler and BMW coming together. I mean, like, those are two very head-to-head competitors who are like, I need to get ahead of this mobility revolution that's like taking over the automotive industry, and I need to do it as quickly as possible. So I'm going to partner with Daimler and create this Share Now platform now. Or you look at FCA and PSA, like, you know, people are collaborating more on either specific projects or merging together or creating like a subsidiary. Like, you know, Ford does that really well with other autonomous companies like Ride iOS and things like that. And so they're realizing that I don't need to do everything myself. And if I do everything myself, then I'm not going to be competitive in the market. And I really need to find the right players who are doing really well and like collaborate with them and add value where I can and like get to the market as quickly as possible. And, you know, when Bird and Lime were essentially not given the permits to operate in Santa Monica and only Lyft and Uber were, they actually came together and went to City Hall and protested. Like they created this protest together with their users and created like this channel of collaboration for that, because at the end of the day, like, we have to support each other. Like, we are in this unique space where it's new, and like, so, you know, we see a lot of that in the States where there's things that are going around with like city initiatives, for example. So like, I believe Bird, Lime, and Spin and others have kind of created this collaboration with cities to help them learn about how to make the streets safer and like, you know, more mobility friendly, and how can we all kind of think about that together and get it up to speed. Because at the end of the day, like, if I don't feel safe taking my scooter out because the streets are not compatible for that, then my utilization is down. And also, if the city is not like equipped to handle, you know, all this new influx of mobility, then there's going to be a lot more injuries, etc. Or like, you know, what they think, clutter in the streets with all the scooters. So there has to be like cross collaboration here for this to be successful. And I'm seeing that more and more that's happening. Like, cities are becoming more open. Like, you know, we have a Wunder cities tool, which like helps the cities essentially understand, you know, all the scooters that are being put on, or like e-bikes and stuff within their market, to better understand, like, you know, are they being repositioned, are in the locations that they need to be in for like equitable usage, etc. So
for operations efficiency as well.
Exactly. And so like, they are trying to kind of get a better handle of it, and they're like realizing that they can't fight it anymore and they have to work together. So right. I mean, it's just essential.
Okay. All right. Okay. I also at this point want to throw it open to anyone in the who's listening in. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. And when we're done with this bit, we'll take any questions. So we've talked a little bit about collaboration, about operating models, your experiences with it, working within organizations, setting it up, your experiences working as a partner, setting this up.
Mm-hmm.
What would, if say you are launching a new mobility business and you've got all the backing that you need to do it.
Who's giving me all the money?
Yeah.
Put your hands up and tell me who wants me to do it with you.
What would be, when it comes to the technology side of it, so operations aside, when it comes to the technology side of it, what would you think through? What are the risks that are involved in choosing your technologies?
Mm-hmm.
Give us a kind of breakdown of how you'd go about it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously you want, when you're thinking about technology, you want to find someone who's going to grow with you. And so like, the team is really essential on whoever's platform you decide to work on, and who's going to kind of be on the forefront of what's happening in the market to kind of be able to help you grow and scale, and like really think about not just the piece around the app, but also what are the other aspects within that you need help with, whether that's, you know, picking out the right hardware or picking out the right scooters. You know, who's going to be able to kind of be a real innovative partner for you is going to be key. But also, like, when I was at Chariot, we started as fixed route, and then it became a thing that we had to kind of quickly become more of a dynamic route service, because that's what our competitors were doing. Like, Via and Moya, and that's what the cities were expecting, which was the services that we were doing more of our business with over time. And so we had the opportunity to buy that piece of the software for about like $100,000 and just integrate it into our existing platform. And we chose not to. We said, nope, we're going to build internally and we're going to make this work ourselves. And we had a team inside, Chariot, a team inside Ford, and a team inside another subsidiary of Ford, kind of working on trying to get to that. And we couldn't get to it. And we spent far more than $100,000 to do that. And that also becomes a learning for you as well, where it's like, it doesn't mean that you have to always do it the way that you've done it before. Like if someone else can help you, whether it's collaborating or partnering and saying like, I need to get to this market faster. So I know you have this service, let's work on this together.
Mm-hmm.
Or like a technology where you're like, I have an existing technology, but I really need XYZ to be competitive. Like it's okay to go and find someone that you can collaborate with and integrate with, because if you don't, that will hurt your business. And like FYI for anyone who is not familiar, sad story, Chariot is no longer in business because of these sorts of things that were not done right. And like, you have to kind of really think about these things up front, like whether it's unit economics or, the right technology and the right way to scale and expand from the beginning. Because if you don't, then you have this enormous fixed costs that continues, and you have a lot of work to do. I mean, it's almost near impossible to get it to be profitable or a viable business for you to do.
And in this particular example, are you able to share, was it speed or was it not understanding what the requirements from the product were that really caused caused this to break down?
I would say a lot of it was speed, inability to kind of move and make those decisions. And I think sometimes what happens when you're an owner or operator, you get attached to it. It's your product, it's your baby, it's your business. Like you've dedicated so much of your life to it, and you think that you can figure it out on your own. And it's like, it's okay if you need help, like just ask for help and like, let us help you. And, there's times where it might make sense for someone to integrate some aspects of our software in the forms of tools or something else. And then you can build alongside. Like we understand that that's, not going to go away. It's not going to go away where just use us and, nobody else. Like that's just unrealistic to think that way. But, you can build alongside what we're doing and still continue to have like a service that makes sense. And then when you're ready to like switch over, you can switch over, and we can still be a partner in some capacity as you're kind of continuing to build out that app. Have us be like a technology partner.
Okay, cool. We have a question from Umair Khan asking how we see electrification and autonomous capabilities play a role in the new mobility space.
So I think autonomous definitely has a role. I think it's much, much further down than we think it is because the infrastructure is not there. I mean, the fact that a vehicle still can't identify if it's a balloon or a child that it's hitting and running over is problematic. And I think cities are not comfortable with, people doing testings and things like that without a driver in the vehicles just yet. So I think we've got a long way to go, both with, regulation and also infrastructure. Like we have to be able to get the lighting and all that stuff in place for autonomous to be around. But we do see examples of autonomous being kind of tested in like very short geofence areas. So sometimes it can happen with like small hotels and small locations that are very safe, where it's just really going from like one place to the other, like maybe from the length of the building down there and back and forth, and that's it. And it has the understanding and the capability to do that.
Is San Francisco testing it as well? Or?
San Francisco is, but not on its own.
Okay.
Yeah, just with a driver.
Yeah,
so all of them have the driver right now.
Okay.
I think Waymo is now doing it in Phoenix on its own, but it's in like its own little like test bed area. So I think they're all still having their own test bed. Electrification, I think, is super interesting. I think that is very much key in what we're thinking about and doing. And I think that, there's been lots of commitments from different cities or countries saying like, we will be electrified by X with our vehicles and we're not going to have gas anymore. And some of them are very ambitious and some of them, are realistic. And even GM, I think they said that they're going to take 8 of their cars and make it all electric by like 2020, which I'm only making this face because it sounds really wild that they are saying that, but I think it's somewhere very close to 2020 or 2021. So there's a big pool to become more electrified. But I think in order for our kind of cars to be more electrified, our infrastructure has to be there, and that is a problem. So for me, I love driving that Chevy Bolt, and I didn't think I would like it as much until, one of our clients was using it, and then I got it, and I'm like, this car is fantastic. It has like great mileage. It feels like a car. It's like good for the environment, XYZ. But then, when I think about owning one in Los Angeles, I'm like, well, I don't have charging stations in my apartment. There's very few charging stations within Los Angeles. And when I do go there, there's like maybe 2 or 3. They're always occupied. And like, how much of that can I actually maintain long term? So I think over time, with all these things coming into place, like the changes and kind of these big, bold statements from companies and cities and countries saying that they're going to have more electrification in their fleets, that the cities will also implement, and apartment buildings, things like that. It'll just become like a requirement.
Yeah, I think I read recently that the UK alone, just as an example, is investing close to £37 million in electrification, so in infrastructure, and that's leading to a lot of startups coming in and filling that void that public sector is not necessarily going to be able to fill in the short run around providing electrification. You're seeing that in Germany as well. You're seeing that in many places. By the way, we're in Hamburg right now, and that's where we're streaming from. All right. We have another question from Federico, who asks if you could go into the unit economics of car share and profitability.
That is, Federico, a much larger, longer conversation that you and I would have to have offline, because it really just depends case by case. Like, it depends on if you're doing free floating versus station-based car sharing, if you're doing all electric car sharing versus, mixed use, or, all that stuff kind of depends, like what kind of car are you using? Are you using the Teslas? Like, that's going to come into play as factoring into what we're doing. So that kind of changes the dynamic of being able to speak to that. But the unit economics kind of depend on the kind of service, because when you are going into free floating, because there's lower utilization, it's about like 22% when you start your first year. You need to actually have 400 to 500 vehicles on the road, like immediately day one, and they have to be within a short span of each other. So I think it's somewhere like within 1 or 2 blocks of each other, because people don't really want to go out of their way to get it. And at least that's the experience we have in the States. We're a little bit lazier, like I want it outside. And so if it's not within reach for them, then it's going to be harder for them to utilize. But with station-based, you can start with about 200 to 250, because usually you'll have 2 vehicles within an office building or apartment building, where they'll just be easier to access and then bring back and know that they're going to always be there, and you don't have to go search for it.
It's like a closed loop somehow.
Exactly. And so it just really depends. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this point? All right, we'll give it a couple of minutes. And in the meantime, I wanted to mention that this is the first of several Wunder insights that we're looking to share with anyone in the industry interested in just learning, knowing what's happening out there, and not just from the Wunder perspective. While we're super happy to have you talk about your experiences, I think the idea is also to have different perspectives here. And so we're going to broaden the scope of Wunder Insights, continue sharing what we learn as we do business, pretty much. So stay tuned. We'll keep you posted on what the next webinars or any other format of information sharing will be.
And also, if you have any ideas of what you want to hear next time, let us know, so then we can, put that into our recommendations. Yeah, and then also let us know if you found this helpful in the comments section, and what we could do better to improve next time. Like, this was very much a free-for-all, and I just was speaking from my heart. I didn't have anything planned or scripted, so I hope that it was helpful to all of you. But any feedback is always great.
Super. So we have a couple of questions, and I think we should have the time to go through them.
Sure.
Umair asks what some problems are that we need to solve to make mobility solutions more favorable.
Yeah, so I think, infrastructure is what we talked about. I think, the city having the infrastructure in place, like, whether it's having the right, bike lanes in place or parking available for these vehicles. I think that is a huge component of it. And also like the city buy-in, they have to feel that whatever service you're bringing in is not going to like take away from their own service. And so I think what we learned at Ford is once we kind of stopped coming in and just doing the service and then asking for permission, we came in beforehand and started to have a dialogue with the cities and said, we're here to actually complement your service. We're not here to compete. And like, what are your pain points? Like, how can we help you? So whether that means, like the city of Los Angeles doesn't have the best metro system in the world, and, they're trying to create it and make it better. But what scooter companies have done that's been really helpful to get more utilization on the metro, I live right above the metro, so I try to use it as much as I can. And I use it more knowing that there's scooters waiting for me outside of each stop. So like there's always going to be a gap in LA where we're just so spread apart that I'm going to need that scooter for like at least some portion of the rest of my trip. And so knowing that if I take this metro to this stop and there's going to be scooters waiting for me, I'm much more inclined to take the metro more often than not, which as before, I probably wouldn't. And so I think that there's a way for cities and, there's that public-private partnerships to happen with cities and private entities to think about these things and think about like how are we just making the service and stuff better. And even like with City of LA, they're doing a pilot right now with Via, where they're putting a couple of their Vias around metro stops for people who need that last mile, first mile solution to get to and from the metro. And they're testing it and piloting out together to see like, can I get more people to use the metro if there is something for them between that first and last mile? And so the same goes with scooters. So I think, being able to collaborate with cities is going to be super important because they have to give you the permits and the ability to operate, but also like being a partner to the cities and saying like, look, like, at the end of the day, like you need XYZ infrastructure, these are the things that we've learned being an operator, and these are the things that we think could help improve, and like we want to work on that with you versus like two different people working in a silo and not speaking to each other. I think that always hurts. So like one operator that's done that really well is Lime, where they have always been city centric in their approach, and they've always talked to the cities first, and they have a really good relationship when they come into a new market.
Yeah, I think you're sort of heading in that direction anyways, but we can wrap up with this question about the biggest barriers before mass adoption of scooter sharing, car sharing, and EV in general.
I mean, I'm seeing a lot of adoption in the States, so I'm not sure if there's like big barriers. I mean, it just kind of ties into what we talked about before, which is the biggest barrier always is this city being able to give you the permit to operate and be able to launch and scale. And so San Francisco originally only allowed 10,000 scooters to come in, and they only gave their permits to operate to 2 providers, which was Scoot and Skip. And then after a year of doing some learnings together, they opened it up to everyone. They actually took Skip out of the equation, gave it to Bird, Lime, and Spin, and Scoot again, and I think Lyft as well, and Jump. So they went from only giving 2 and being very anti-scooter to pretty much opening it up to everyone. And I'm not sure the number that they kind of came up with, but I think it's more than the 10,000 that they originally started at 1,000, I'm sorry, and I think it's now up to 10,000 scooters within the city. And they actually are closing down Market Street, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Market Street in San Francisco, but it's the busiest street within San Francisco. And so for them to shut down Market Street and make it a mobility friendly and pedestrian friendly zone, like only letting taxis and buses go through and not Ubers and Lyfts and even regular passenger vehicles go through, is a huge step forward to changing the mindset within new markets and cities. So, that I think will also be the trend. We're seeing that a lot in Europe as well, with cities in Madrid. And I think Paris is going to be doing something like that as well. So I think that's going to be more of the norm of the cities adapting and making things more pedestrian friendly than they were in the past.
So regulation will really, in your mind, be the driver for the adoption at scale. But if I can ask from sort of the consumer side, what do you think there are any challenges there to adoption that operators need to think about, or is that no longer? Have we gone past that? Have people now no longer anti-kick scooter, anti-e-scooter?
I mean, everyone's going to always be anti, this or that, because, some people just are not going to get it. But I think like the adoption rates are much higher. And it really just depends on the mindset of where you're going, right? So like, people, for example, in Miami, it's a very scooter friendly place in general. Like citizens of Miami are riding mopeds all the time. So like, it's a very safe place to go and to get on a scooter or get on a bike, because the cars are already familiar with the mopeds that have been there for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So you automatically just feel safer in Miami utilizing mobility. And so I think that can be, a factor into what we're doing. But, it just depends.
And it seems like safety is becoming like a factor in regulation anyway. So
Absolutely.
that could enable it.
Absolutely.
I think we'll wrap up with one last question, which asks about what Wunder's role will be in this next year as we focus on e-scooters and the fact that big companies are using in-house software solutions. So what do you see Wunder doing actually in this evolving new mobility landscape?
Yeah, so I think it just goes back to what we discussed earlier, which is, there's going to be the birds and the limes of the world that are going to want to build things internally. And that comes from pressure a lot of time from your investors and, wanting to have control of your product. And then a lot of mobility startups also feel that they have their own secret sauce or their own playbook, and that the best way that they can kind of navigate that is just building it internally. But I think what is happening as well alongside that is they realize they don't have to do everything internally, and maybe they can't do everything internally, and they are turning to third-party providers like ourselves to kind of come in and help them either customize existing services or maybe even doing something different, like creating like fleet management tools for them to utilize as a different source within what they're doing. So like it could be a different app that helps them with their fleet management, like rebalancing, or going into looking at like, getting their field workers to do certain tasks, etc., which a lot of that we already have in our fleet management, our fleet product to begin with. Like the fleet management aspect is already in there. But if you don't have our fleet product like as your main core app, you can use those aspects to help better manage your existing fleet. So there's different ways in which we can work with different scooter providers. And I think we have over 100,000 vehicles on our platform, most of which is micromobility. So we are well equipped to help in this space.
Okay, with that, I think we can wrap things up. It seems like there aren't any questions anymore. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Melika, for sharing your experiences working at different places. And we look forward to having you on the next webinar as well. Oh my gosh,
you're going to have me back?
Along with a few others.
Let's see what everybody says after. Let's get the feedback.
Okay, super. Yeah, so like she said earlier, share your feedback. Let us know what you liked and what you didn't, whether there's something you particularly want us to talk about the next time. We'd love to do that.
Awesome.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. How do you think that went?